Well, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Randy Wong. Welcome to the October webinar for the treatment of floaters. I am a retina specialist located in Fairfax, Virginia. We're going to have a short webinar tonight. And we have a special guest. We're going to have Nate. After I get through the disclaimers, we'll get started. I need to tell you that this webinar is for informational purposes only, and that this webinar does not offer medical advice, so nothing should be construed as medical advice. The information on this webinar is only offered for informational purposes. You should not act or rely on anything in this webinar or use it as a substitute for medical advice from a licensed professional. The content of this webinar may quickly become outdated, especially due to the nature of the topics covered, which are constantly evolving. The materials and the information on this webinar are not guaranteed to be correct, complete, or timely. Nothing in this webinar and nothing you or I just do creates a doctor-patient relationship between you and the webinar, between you and me, or between you and Randall Wong, MD, or retinaeyedoctor.com, or vitrectomyforfloaters.com. Even if you try to contact me through this posting of the webinar or conversations through the webinar, you are not creating a doctor-patient relationship. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor unless there is a written agreement specifically providing for a doctor-patient relationship. Having said that, just to remind you, I'm a retina specialist in Fairfax, Virginia, which is located about 20 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. I have two principal websites, vitrectomyforfloaters.com and retinaeyedoctor.com. I thought we'd change up the format a little bit tonight, and I am going to interview a special guest. His name is Nate. He's about 22 years old. He suffered with floaters in each eye for well over a year. He had a vitrectomy to his left eye about 6 weeks ago. There was no PVD at the time. His eye was healthy. There was no evidence of inflammation. Give me just a second, and I'm going to bring Nate and introduce Nate, and we'll talk a little bit. Hello, Nate. Are you there? I can hear you. I'm assuming, therefore, everyone else can. Chrissy says yes.
Great.
So I think we're good to go. John, Sarah. So, Nate, why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us just a little bit about who you are. And
last summer, the summer of 2016, I noticed one floater in my left eye, and it bothered me when I was reading. It wasn't such a big problem. Over the next few months, especially while I was in college, it became more and more, debilitating. I was having difficulty reading in my textbooks, difficulty paying attention in class with the presentations, and basically, in the spring of 2017, it had really become bad, to the point where it was really affecting my studies. In the summer in 2017, I basically stopped activity. I stopped driving. It was dangerous. It wasn't safe for me to drive. I basically stopped going to class, stopped reading. Actually, I became very depressed. During this entire time of this period of a year, I had been seeing about a dozen doctors all across America, the top retina institutes in the country. And not a surprise, everyone told me that there was nothing that they could do. None of them were willing to do the vitrectomy. As soon as I brought it up, it was an absolute no. They weren't willing to do that. I tried the laser twice in two different parts of America. Also, not surprisingly, that didn't help even a little bit. So I just, it was very bad. Eventually, I just researched vitrectomy for floaters in Washington, D.C., because that's the general area that I'm in. And I found Randy. Made the appointment, and the next week we did the vitrectomy. despite basically every single family member and friend of mine ganging up on me and trying to stop me from doing the vitrectomy. But thankfully, I ignored them. And I went ahead and did the vitrectomy with my left eye. Came out 100% clear. I can see again, and I appreciate the opportunity to see. And I'm looking, trying to find a job in a very scenic area right now, so that I can use my vision again. So, yeah.
I'd just like to point in, I think it's a very touching story, and I think that everyone listening has been going through some of their own trials and tribulations with, opacities that no one really wants to take seriously. And I thank you, Nate, for joining us and sharing your experience with everybody else. If I can ask you a couple questions, obviously everyone said either don't do this or you just got to put up with that. And we've all heard that over and over and over again. And I'm going to ask you, having been through it, what are the top 2 or 3 emotions or thoughts that come to mind? For instance, maybe not as bad as you thought.
Well, how the vitrectomy is portrayed by the doctors. And
like
again, I'm speaking about absolute top retina institutes in America. I went to the best in the greater Washington, D.C. and Baltimore area. It's portrayed as this horrid surgery and that blinds people, and that the complications are just terrible, and it's the last thing that you ever want to do. It turned out that the vitrectomy, at least for me, wasn't so bad at all. Obviously, you got to go, have a little bit of a local anesthetic. I think it would be similar to something that would be, outpatient. It's an outpatient surgery. So obviously you're gonna, I was a little bit messed up for the day of the surgery, and the remaining part of that day. For a few days after, messed up from the anesthesia.
Messed up from the anesthesia, or messed up from the anxiety, or both.
But for a few days after the surgery, my eye was a little bit itchy. It's really, I guess the thing is, it's not bad. My eye was red for a couple weeks after. That's just what happens. So, yeah.
And that's normal. So I'll just, if I may, I'll share a little bit about kind of the technical details of what you went through. Is that your operation took about 20 minutes. We did induce a PVD. I did use sutures to close, and you were given sedation so that you probably don't remember the injection to numb up your eye. And you were, like many people that do not get anesthesia very often, you were sleepy for quite a bit afterwards. But the operation took about 20 minutes from what I remember. And again, it went very straightforward. You're basically awake but comfortable during the operation. Redness or bleeding on the outside eye is common because we've got so many tiny capillaries that can bleed from the operation itself. Plus, in you, we use stitches, which is what I wanted to do for you. And then you had a very fast and uncomplicated healing period. And the redness, again, was from bleeding, which is normal. It happens almost, most of the time. You can't help but nick these tiny little capillaries on the outside covering called the conjunctiva. Anything else that you remember? What was
the vitrectomy
was your vision improvement?
It takes the entire vitreous out. So obviously, it took 100% of the floaters out there that I had, and I had a few dozen floaters in my left eye. But it took everything out. There was one thing that Randy, you did say in a previous webinar, is that sometimes for a couple weeks after the vitrectomy, you could notice a couple of floaters that are different from the other ones, and that's absolutely actually what happened with me. There were a few tiny dots, and they would pop in for a few minutes, and they would just disappear. And that actually happened for probably a good couple weeks after the vitrectomy. Wasn't bothersome at all. Just a couple of dots tiny ones for me that were there just for a few minutes, and then they just disappeared. And that occurred maybe a few times a day for the next couple weeks after the surgery. But obviously now I'm, no floaters in my left eye, completely clean.
Well, that's terrific. Now, I told everybody that I did put stitches to close the sclerotomies and then the conjunctiva. How long were you aware that you had stitches?
Not longer than
how
a few
long
days.
was it that you could feel them? That's great. And that's normal. The sutures usually dissolve on their own. It takes sometimes weeks, or usually it takes weeks for them to completely kind of dissolve and get absorbed. But your statement is typically accurate in that after just a couple of days, you don't even know they're there.
Yeah. For about a month.
And how long were you on drops?
After the surgery.
Did I stop them yet? I don't remember. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And your vision today is obviously you just
and it's back
floater
to normal.
free.
So yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you one other question, and then I think we're going to open up to questions. Reflecting back, was this as big a deal as you thought it might be?
Like I said, over the past year, I'd been to so many doctors, and they just wouldn't do the vitrectomy, and they just, tried their best to, discourage me and tell me, how it blinds people and how there's not anyone who's going to do the vitrectomy. It caused a lot of emotional pain to me, and I'm still working on getting over that. But I guess the biggest thing is that it's just, it's just not how it's portrayed by other doctors is just not how it was for me.
Well, Nate, I really thank you for taking the time to taking the time to share your experience with everybody. I'm going to keep your mic on, and I'm going to ask the other attendees to just ask questions. I'll read them, and I'll either answer them or turn it over to Nate. But Nate, I'm going to keep your microphone on if that's okay. And hopefully we can get done in the next 10, 15 minutes. So now we're into Q&A Ask Nate. And Brad asks, hey, Nate, thanks for the testimony. I'm 22 as well, and I'm finishing up college too. Why do you use sutures, Randy, and is sedation through an IV in an arm? Also, Nate, are you nearsighted at all? Last question, will you do it for the other eye? So I'll answer my part, and then Nate, you're going to answer your part. How's that? I prefer for almost especially young people, and I'm going to say, and for those of you that are 45, don't get angry with me, but I'm going to call young for vitrectomy 40 to 45. For the younger patients, even with 25 gauge, especially if they're coming in from out of town, I prefer to use stitches because it wipes out any possibility of low pressure the next morning and any possibility of what I call retrograde bleeding, meaning bleeding from the outside of the eye through the sclerotomies into the eye if the pressure is low during the first night of surgery. The reason I like to do that is because then there are fewer things to worry about as I say goodbye to you, usually the next day. So I prefer to do that. Sedation is through an IV. You get the IV usually in your arm, and we give you a combination of propofol and fentanyl, but something that knocks you out. And during that few minutes that you're knocked out, I will numb around your eye so that when you waken, you can't move your eye and everything is numbed up.
Yeah, my left eye is very bad.
Nate, he wants to know, are you nearsighted at all?
And I think it actually happens to be, if I'm correct, Randy, that people who have bad vision tend to have worse floaters in that eye, if I'm correct. That's...
Yeah, I don't know if that's an actual correlation or not, but I've heard that before. If it is a
Yeah,
correlation,
that's what some
I'm
other
at a loss
doctors at
for
a
how to
very
explain that.
prestigious
So
eye
I
institute
really
told
don't
me
have an answer for that.
before they declined to do the vitrectomy.
Okay.
um, yeah, so
Yeah.
hopefully
How
we will
about,
be
will
doing
you
it for
do it
the
for the
other eye
other
in about
eye?
a month or two. My right eye is nowhere even close to what my left eye was. Um, the problem with my right eye is it's only got a little stringy floaters, but they're right in the center of my vision, um, and that's a problem when driving. But I guess really it's dependent upon the person
Yeah.
and the level of the floaters. I know people who have floaters and they're way in the side of their vision. They notice them basically never. So I guess probably vitrectomy for them isn't worth it. But for somebody who it's a problem, so then do the vitrectomy.
Great. Sarah asks, if I don't do a PVD, as I fear tearing and folds, can we still do dye so we can see the vitreous and get as much as possible? How confident are you in your skill of inducing? That's a tough question. I would prefer to do a PVD. I've been doing that really almost consistently in almost everyone for probably the last 2 or 3 years. And the reason is because I can operate much more efficiently and therefore safer in being able to remove more of the vitreous. I would have to say that I'm very confident in my ability to inducing a PVD, but I'm confident in the fact that I can do it with minimizing the chance of you getting a tear. And that's the best I can tell you. Now, to your other part of the question, can we still use dye? Sure, we can use dye or Kenalog to help me visualize the vitreous to try and remove as much as possible. But I think that you're best served in the long run if we induce a PVD in terms of improving your vision. Not so much, not sure I understand what you mean by folds. So if you want to retype that, go ahead. John, maybe you're talking about John is. Can choroidal folds be avoided? If so, how? Also, if I get a fold, can it be reversed? If so, how? Can sutures help avoid this? The answer is choroidal detachments or folds in the choroid as a result of hypotony can be avoided by using sutures. And choroidal folds are unusual, secondary to hypotony. They're unusual in this operation. There are plenty of eye operations where they happen quite a bit. But in this scenario, one of the reasons I prefer to do this is it decreases the chance of choroidal folds. And I've got to say, for reasons I do not know, my experience is that younger people tend not to automatically close by themselves, meaning the little holes that we put in your eye for some reason take a little bit longer to seal. So sometimes if the pressure is low and you can get choroidal detachments, we've had very, very few choroidal folds over the last 5 years, maybe 2 or 3 patients at most. I try really to avoid things like that because it just kind of ruins the whole experience. Brad wants to know, why are we on drops for so long? Well, you're going to be on 2 drops. One drop is an antibiotic, and that is short-lived. Probably need it only for about a week. I prefer to keep you on drops for several weeks, especially if you have sutures. It helps keep the sutures wet. It also reminds you that, in addition to healing, that this takes several weeks for your eye to heal. So it's a good reminder that tells you things aren't normal yet. As far as the physiologic reason, the steroid drops, which I like to use for several weeks, certainly decrease the discomfort after the surgery. Jack wants to know, hi, Dr. Wong. My mother did a vitrectomy for a different condition, not sure what that was, and she felt it really harmed her eyesight. She was very upset at the result, I remember. Is the type you're doing just for floaters different and thus safe? This is a really tough question. The reason is that if I do vitrectomy for 10 different reasons, vitrectomy is the first part of every operation, meaning just removing the vitreous. Now, your mom could have had a vitrectomy for a macular hole, an epiretinal membrane, to fix a retinal detachment, to repair complications of cataract surgery. That was probably the culprit and the real reason why she needed the vitrectomy, and she may not have had the results. So I don't think we're really comparing apples to apples. I would say the part that I would be, the part of the vitrectomy that I would be doing to remove the floaters is probably the same as what your mom did. But my guess is your mom had other things going on. Josh says, hello, Randy. I know that you don't have time to keep track of the FOVs you do, so I have to ask how you know that this is safe if there's no data kept for them. If you limit it to FOVs, a lot of patients come from out of town. I've been doing this for almost 25 years. The results or the stats that I give you are not my stats, meaning 1 chance in 10,000 of endophthalmitis, 1 to 2% chance of retinal detachment. Those are national statistics. So that's kind of everybody's, or I would guess the average of everybody's. And I would say that my own experience is that mine fall into those realms. Mr. Suman says, as we see different size shaped floaters, actually, what do they indicate? I mean, what type of floaters, what type of problems are they indicated? I'm actually not ever interested in the morphology, meaning the size, shape, number, or color of floaters, because I think they vary. The only important thing to me is, do they move to and fro with eye movement? And that means whatever's bothering you has to be located in the vitreous, because that's the only part of the eye or the visual pathway which something could slosh back and forth. So different sizes don't matter. Different shapes don't matter. Different colors don't matter. Partially transparent doesn't matter. Oblong versus circular, et cetera, et cetera. As far as I'm concerned, none of that makes a difference. Brad asks to Nate, has there been any sign of a cataract, and was there some vitreous left behind your lens to reduce this?
I'm not
Nate,
sure about
ahead,
the second part of the question. I don't know if I understood. Okay, good.
That's why I'm going to chime in. So Nate's pretty usual. It's been 6 weeks out. Last time I saw him, which was about a week or so ago, there was no evidence of cataract whatsoever. If there were something going on, he'd probably tell you the vision was great and then it's now blurry. I think that it's almost impossible not to leave some vitreous behind the lens, especially in a young person, because the vitreous is attached or actually adherent to the back of the lens. I know that there's some surgeons out there that claim that they're able to leave X amount of vitreous there. I'm going to have to tell you that it's pretty hard to judge how much vitreous you leave there. But on the same token, there is some vitreous that's there. I'm not interested in removing it because there's no way you could see anything in it. And it would be very, very hard to remove all of it. Does the vitreous ever break off? Also, has there been any complications in inducing a PVD? Like, I'm assuming Brad wants to know, does the vitreous ever separate from the back of the lens? And the answer probably is no, especially after a vitrectomy, because we've actually debulked most of the vitreous, so there's very little inertia to the vitreous being pulled off just by mass. So I'm going to just say no. It is possible that if you don't induce a PVD, that you actually do get a PVD later on. I've actually had that in several of my patients. I have never had, knock wood, a complication such as a macular hole from inducing a PVD. Randy, what does the future look like for treatment of floaters? Will we ever use the hypersonic vitrector? The hypersonic vitrector is very, very, very new. I think that state of the art is going to remain 25 gauge and 27 gauge. The next generation of vitrectomy machines, I think, are going to have enhanced optics and not necessarily any change in the instrumentation. The hypersonic vitrector, in my opinion, is going to be if ever, it's going to be a long time before it's adopted, mainly because the present instrumentation is so good and is so, quite frankly, is so safe and without complications. Nate, do you want to say anything in closing?
I mean, I'll just say that. Okay.
Or think about that. I'm going to answer Jerry's question, then I'll come back to you. Jerry wants to know, gives you some extra time. Hey, Dr. Wong, how long do you recommend a patient taking off of work? Also, how long before vision returns back to normal? Coming to see you in February for right eye vitrectomy. I'm going to answer you this way. Basically, you can expect to return to full activity within 48 hours. Most patients have returned to normal vision probably within a week. And that's kind of the best generalization I can give you. As far as taking off work is concerned, I don't really have any reason why you can't return to work in 2 to 3 days, mainly because, and regardless of what kind of work you do, because physical activity is not going to impact your healing. In fact, I recommend everyone that is my patient that after I examine them, they are usually eligible to return back to full activity within 48 hours. Keep in mind also that your eye, nose, and mouth, or your eyes, nose, and mouth are all interconnected. So your eye is pretty dirty to begin with. There's usually a question about, well, what if I splash something in it? And usually it's probably cleaner than the fluid that's around your eye to begin with. And so, John, I think I probably answered that question about heavy powerlifting as you do about heavy lifting and CrossFit. As far as I'm concerned, you can start back 24 or 48 hours, assuming no complications. Okay, Nate.
Sure.
Would you like to say anything in closing?
It's just not as bad as it's presented to be. I guess for all those people out there who are wondering, how they're going to get somebody to help them, I guess Randy is probably one of the only guys in America, if not the only, who can do a floater only vitrectomy. So he can help you. So for anyone out there, don't get discouraged.
Well, Nate, I really appreciate your joining us. I missed 2 or 3 questions, so I'm going to answer those, and then we're going to sign off. Nate, I just want to say thank you so much for coming, and I think this was a great format tonight, actually having a live patient interviewed on our forum. I know Chrissy's out there reminding me that I missed a couple questions. I missed one from Josh. It says, I have very irregular corneas, keratoconus, and a -11. I am told retina is healthy, though I will pose this issue. If you're asking if this is a contraindication to surgery, the answer is no. Jack wants to know, I do have a posterior vitreous attachment, which caused a so-called White's ring, which I had partially lasered out. Am I still a candidate, even though I have a seemingly minor PVD? Presence or absence of a PVD does not is not a problem. If you're still having problems with opacities or floaters that are moving to and fro, we'll go through the same exam. And if I think that you're going to be a good candidate, certainly we can proceed. Okay, I think last question is, have I done, I've done many operations with keratoconus. As long as I can see through the cornea, I can do a vitrectomy. Sarah wants to know, can I tell if I have you have a PVD? If the answer is yes. I can tell during the exam whether or not you have a PVD. Jack says, many thanks. I'll be contacting you later. Chrissy is my online coordinator. Get her email. It's rwongcm13@gmail. If you want to come visit us, I'll post that on the website. And I'm going to say, there you go. Thank you. rwongcm13@gmail. John says, thanks. I want to say thank you to everybody for joining. We're going to do this again in a month. Chrissy is going to be November 28th. Is that right? Josh says, thank you, Nate. Yeah, just be on the lookout for the on the website or Facebook. But I think our next webinar is going to be November 28th, and we're going to try and notify everybody more timely than before. Guys, thanks everybody for joining in. Nate especially. Chrissy, thank you always for all the help you give me. And I wish everyone a happy Halloween.
Yeah.
Josh,
I'll be happy to post
reach
my
Nate
phone number
at all
or
for any
email address.
additional
Is that
questions?
okay with you, Randy?
I'm going to. Yeah, why don't you just post your email or give it to me, and I can put it on the narrative.
Yeah, so I went ahead and
post
typed
this on
it in.
YouTube. If you want to type it in now, go for it. There you go.
So for the people on YouTube, it's NNOSS1,
Go ahead.
like the number 1, at binghamton.edu. That's BINGHAMTON.edu. So again, Binghamton.
No P.
So we'll say it again.
NNOSS. I had a problem with the absence of the P.
1 at binghamton.edu. Not Binghamton, but Binghamton.
Good night, everybody. Nate, good night. Chrissy, good night. Thanks for joining in, everybody. Bye-bye.